Good afternoon, everyone. So welcome to today's session. This is going to be the first session, but we'll wait for 2 more minutes to let the participants join in. Please hold for 2 more minutes. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this Only One Theme awareness campaign, which is organized by TechX in collaboration with Venture Center and National Biopharma Mission supported. So this is going to be a series of almost 18 talks starting today on every second and fourth Tuesdays between 4 to 5 p.m. The idea is to talk about one theme at a time, and today's theme is around patents. So we have today's speaker, Mr. Ravi Bhola, with us, who is partner with K&S Partners. Welcome, Ravi, to the session. Ravi is practicing IP for more than 2 decades now. His focus areas are patents and designs. He has drafted and prosecuted large number of patent cases in diverse areas of technology, apart from the above. He is actively involved in complex advisory and contentious matters. He is a certified patent valuation analyst and enjoys working with exciting startups and mentors a few. Ravi also provides pro bono support to a few charitable trusts and has recently set up Ossi Foundation along with his wife Anchal to help the underprivileged. So with this brief introduction, welcoming you to the session and over to you.
Thank you so much. Good evening to everyone. And big thank you to Venture Center, big thank you to Dr. Premnath, Dr. Mugde, and everyone at Venture Center for having me here. Extremely delighted to meet you all, and I'm going to talk only about patents. I'll try to keep this interactive, so while I present, in case you have any questions, observations, suggestions, please feel free to type in the chat section. I'll be happy to respond to that. So with this, very quickly about the firm that I represent, it's K&S Partners. It's a pure play IP firm dealing with all forms of IP, 6 offices across the country. So a national firm with about 275 people put together. When we talk about patents, what are we talking about? We are talking about a legal tool, a legal mechanism by way of which you can monopolize your invention, right? So it's a monopoly which is granted by the state to you for having developed something which is of value. When you talk about invention, very generally speaking, we're talking about something which has some relation to science and technology. So it could be even things like you manufacture something, but let's say you have developed a unique technology to manufacture it very cost effectively, or use a entirely different material to manufacture it. So that can qualify to be a patent. Monopoly under patent is granted for 20 years. It used to be in the past different terms for different countries, at least for US till recent past. But now globally, it's 20 years monopoly from the date you file a patent application, right? And as I said earlier, these patent rights are all country-specific rights. So if you are seeking monopoly in India, then your monopoly is restricted to Indian territory. You can't extend that monopoly just by Indian patent into any neighboring country or any other country outside. So for example, if you're manufacturing in India, so it's of interest to you to have a patent in India. But if your market is US, it means that you may want to get a patent in US to enjoy the monopoly in US market. So that's how broadly how patents work. Now, very, very typical timelines in terms of how much time does it take to get a patent granted in India. Generally, it's about 3 to 4 years. And that's the trend globally. If you think of it, even in US and Europe and other big markets, typically it does take about 3 to 4 years to get a patent granted. So it's very similar to what you see in India. For startups, interestingly in India, under the rule amendments that we had in patent, you are able to consistently get a patent as a startup in 1 year or at times under 1 year term. So that's fantastic, because I know there are a lot of people in the audience today who are entrepreneurs and who are running their startups. So I would strongly encourage those who are willing to seek patent to file the application under the startup category, and then you'll be able to have your patent application fast tracked for grant. Now, since we're talking about startup, just to clarify what startup means under the Indian context. So if you are a company set up within last 10 years, if in no year of your existence you ever had a turnover of more than 100 crore, you're not a spin-off from a large company and your focus area is innovation, then you qualify as a startup under the Indian law, and therefore you're able to leverage that fast tracking of your patent. Now let's shift gears and talk about, what kind of inventions can become patents. So for any invention to become a patent, globally, there are 3 standard prerequisites. One, your invention has to be globally new. It's important for you to appreciate that while you may have filed a patent in India for monopoly restricted to only India, still the novelty or newness in your invention should be of global nature. You can't say, I'm seeking patent only in India, so novelty should be limited to only Indian territory. If somebody has done this in US, it doesn't matter. No, it doesn't work like that. So while you are seeking patent only in India, your monopoly also gradually will be only in India once you get a patent, but the novelty requirement is a global requirement. Similarly, other prerequisite to get a patent is inventiveness or inventive step, which is also called as non-obviousness. What it broadly means is that, is there a surprise element in your invention? Is the result you are getting is something totally unexpected? Or the methodology you followed, does it have some steps which are totally on unexpected lines? If yes, your invention will qualify as a having inventive step or is non-obvious. And of course, whatever invention you have developed, it should have some sort of a use or industrial applicability. So if you're able to meet all these 3 prerequisites, your invention can mature into a patent. Now, let's understand this with some examples here. Let's say look at the example in the field of nanotechnology. Think of this as a question. I'll be happy to receive your inputs on the chat. So let's say you have a particle, you have a material or an element. You are the first one in the world to reduce the size of that particle to nano. You're the first one in the world. And what happens when you reduce it to nano size is that the bioavailability of that element or material goes up. Okay, now the question for you is that, is this invention novel or not? Is this invention inventive enough or not to mature into a patent? And I'm just wondering if you can type in your responses in the chat section, and probably then we can, discuss about that. Yeah, sure. You can make an attempt, even if it's wrong, it's all right. So there is one response which says, okay, novel, yes, inventive, maybe. Interesting. Gautam says yes. So I presume, Gautam, you're saying yes for both novelty and inventive step. Any other responses? Okay, so Gautam clarified that. So the way the patent office might look at it is the following. Patent office would say, novelty, yes, because you are the first one in the world to reduce the size of that element or material into nano. So in that very physical form or that very chemical form, it was never there in the world in the past. So yes, you meet the requirement of novelty. The question is, do you meet the requirement of inventive step or not? And here again, one line of argument could be to say, hey, bioavailability, isn't it kind of generally accepted that if you reduce the size of a particle, there is a high likelihood that the material's bioavailability will increase? That's one line of argument one can take. And if yes, then isn't it obvious? What's so great about it? So that's one way to look at it. The patent examiner who's scrutinizing your application may say this. On the other hand, you may want to counter it by saying, hey, I can show you so much of literature which can establish that not every time you reduce the size of the particle, it will invariably lead to increase in viability. It may not happen necessarily. So there is a possibility that, in certain cases, it may not happen. And therefore, my invention is inventive because it is not necessarily on expected lines. So that's where, inventive step is always a very subjective issue. And it's always good to have line of arguments depending upon which area of technology and in what context we are arguing the cases. So let me just flip the question a bit to say, okay, if you reduce the size of the particle, and what happens is that it leads to the molecule showing fluorescence. We'll move to the next slide.
Yes.
Yeah. Next slide. Yeah. So in this case, instead of bioavailability, we're talking about that the particle when its size was reduced, it suddenly started showing property like fluorescence. Now, would it qualify to be novel and inventive? And I'll be happy to receive some responses on the chat. Sona wants the volume to be decreased.
Maximum.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay, well, the maximum volume, I'll try to speak louder. So Rama has mentioned that novel, yes, inventive, yes. Okay. Can we have some more responses? Yes for both by Gaurav. And can someone also provide a reasoning why? So novelty part is, I think, relatively straightforward. For inventiveness, why do you believe it is inventive? And how is it different from, let's say, the previous example in terms of inventiveness? So any thoughts around that? So I mean, if typically in a case at the patent office, the examiner would say, it's not very common that you, when typically reduce the size of a particle, it will suddenly start showing fluorescence. So unlike the previous example where we talked about bioavailability, while there's enough literature around it, with reduced size, enhanced bioavailability. For fluorescence, there is no such trend whatsoever to say that okay, reduction in size can lead to fluorescence. So it's the property which has been showcased by reduction of size is totally unexpected, and therefore this example is a stronger example of inventiveness and therefore becoming a patent. Now, very quickly, in terms to give you an idea, so what we discussed so far was globally for any invention to become a patent, it should have novelty, it should have inventive step, and it should have some use, right? Now, each country also develops its own nuanced approach around patentability by way of what we call sometimes artificial exclusion. Okay, it means that while your invention can be novel, can be inventive, would have some use for sure, but still in certain cases, it may not qualify to be a patent because laws in certain countries may prohibit patenting of certain kinds of inventions. So this kind of gives you a very macro view of how patentability is largely seen in India. So if you have a medical device, you develop a new device, you can get a patent for it. You have a software invention, in vast majority of cases, you can get a patent for it. You develop a new drug, new composition, new formulation, you can get a patent for it. You develop a new process for assembling a medical device, a new process for formulating a composition, all that is patentable. Things which are currently not patentable, and that's been the trend for longest time in India, is method of treatment, the way you treat, the steps you employ to, let's say, inject a medicine or administer a medicine to a patient or a subject, the way you diagnose a patient or a subject for a particular disease condition, the way you perform a surgery, any prophylactic methodology, agricultural methodology, horticulture. These are certain kinds of methodologies which are not patentable in India. And that's been the case for the longest time. And we don't anticipate any change around that in foreseeable future. Recombinant strains. So while a naturally occurring microbe is not patentable, it is seen more like a discovery with limited or no human intervention. Recombinant strains or microbes where you've brought in some changes by way of, let's say, bringing in some change in the genetic composition of the microbe, you can get a patent for it because you brought in some human intervention. And there is generally the expectation that the change you have brought into the strain will lead to certain new application or use of the microbe for a particular function. Microbes are patentable as a form of life, but any higher form of life is not patentable in India. So you're looking at plants and animals and things like that are not patentable in India, right? In US, if I have to give you some sort of a contrast. So in US, you can get patent for plants. In US, you can't get patent for higher forms of animal life, but plants you can get. They call it as a plant patent is there. But then US also with time has kind of converged, has become closer to rest of the world in terms of patentability. Till about 7-8 years ago, as these used to typically say, everything under the sun was patentable in US, but US also has brought in certain artificial exclusions to not let patent be allowed in certain kinds of invention. And I'll be happy to take those questions. But at this stage, do you have any questions for me? You can type in the chat section and I can take those questions and thereafter we can move to the next set of topics.
No, there are no questions.
Yeah. So the Gaurav, I think, clarified on the previous question that we were having around the obvious step. So Gaurav, that's a good line of thinking that you have. Yeah. All right. So what we'll do is we'll shift gears, and I wanted to just talk about some very practical 10 pointers that I have learned with time in the practice, which are relevant in terms of how, especially in the startup kind of environment, particularly relevant. Now, typically, what I've seen when I work with startups and entrepreneurs are really hustling and they have so much happening. They often not able to spend enough time and give enough attention to IP and patents in particular, because they have to build the team, build the product, to get the clients, keep the organization running. So in all this kind of hustle, sometimes IP and patents do not get the kind of attention it should. The challenge is that we talked about novelty requirement for patent. Now, if you start selling the product, start marketing the product, without having filed for a patent, then even if you are the first creator in the world, the prior disclosure to the market, prior disclosure to the world of your own product can prevent you from getting a patent for your own very invention. So timing is critical. So while you do all of that as an entrepreneur, make sure that you're able to file for patent before you disclose your invention to third parties or start offering to sell the product or start marketing the product. So make sure timing is critical. Do not procrastinate the need to timely file the application. Trust me, I have seen so many instances where entrepreneurs have been successful in the market, but the moment they want to raise funds and investors ask them, okay, do you have a monopoly in this market? Or can anyone with deeper pockets can kill you in next 3 months if they also make the same product? And that's where entrepreneurs and inventors struggle, because they say they have not created any entry barrier for the other players in the market. So anyone and everyone can copy their product. So bigger player obviously can eat the smaller player. So make sure you are able to timely file for patent as an entrepreneur before it's too late. Also, in terms of fundraising, it's so very critical. Second point I wanted to draw your attention to was about ownership of IP. So while you're an entrepreneur, you have a company, you own the company, you hire employees, you hire contractors, you get interns onboarded, you work with third-party vendors, and then inventions are created in your organization. Now, can you assume that you as a company or you as a sole proprietor of that company is the owner of that IP or owner of that patent? Not necessarily. You can't presume that. Reason being, if your employment contract does not clearly articulate that the employees are obligated to assign all the inventions they create to the company, you can have some sort of a question mark over who the owner in such cases is. If you are working with contractors who are working for multiple players in the industry, do you have an agreement which clearly says that it's a contract for service, where whatever they'll do for you, which they are paid for, exclusively belongs to you? If it doesn't, contractor can have a different interpretation in terms of who the owner of that IP is. And clearly, again, as an entrepreneur or as a budding entrepreneur, tomorrow you want to raise capital, you want to scale up. The question investors will ask, the funding agencies would ask, is that who's really the owner of that IP? And if you are not truly the only / exclusive owner, they may have dilemma and bit of a reservation in terms of really working with you, because they'll say, okay, tomorrow this ownership of IP can be challenged. So make sure that you have a proper system in place to ensure, be it employment contract with your employees, be the agreement you do with your interns who work with you for a short duration, be the contractors you hire for specific projects, and make sure that you have clarity in terms of who owns what. Even if you want structurally for this to be a joint ownership, make sure it is captured suitably in the agreements to avoid any ambiguity going forward. This is again a very important element, because I remember at least one instance where somebody was pursuing PhD in an academic institution. That person was earlier working in the telecom sector, and this happened in Bangalore. And the gentleman had enrolled for PhD program sponsored by his company, the telecom company. And what this PhD candidate did not realize was that when he was hired, his employment contract clearly said anything and everything that he would do during the course of the employment will be exclusively owned by the employer, which means a telecom company. When the academic institution enrolled that student for PhD program, there were some terms and conditions which were not aligned with the prior commitment this PhD student had made during the course of his employment. And that's what created a lot of challenge in terms of who the real owner is, that institute or that employer or the PhD student. So be mindful of that. The third point that I wanted to draw your attention to is that not every scientist, not every engineer, not everyone in the lab who works on that project which matures into a patent will qualify as inventors. It's important for you to understand that ownership is about what we call applicantship in patent terms, and inventorship is about the people, individuals who have contributed towards the development of the invention. Now, you may have projects where, let's say, 10 people are working, 15 people are working. But does it mean everyone in that group will qualify as an inventor? General understanding is not really. So what is the criteria? The consideration is that the people or individuals who have contributed intellectually to that project, intellectually to that invention, are the ones who should qualify as inventors. People who have solved the problems while you were executing that project will qualify also as inventors. But people who have merely executed somebody else's instructions in the lab without contributing intellectually beyond a certain threshold may not necessarily qualify as inventors. So identification of clear set of inventors is critical. Now different, as I said, patents are all country specific rights. There's one country I can definitely tell you, which is Germany, where what happens is that the moment an invention is monetized by the company, let's say, commercialized product hits the market, under the German constitution, the inventors are required to be compensated around, I think, 7% or something like that of the profits which the company makes on that invention where that inventor is listed as an inventor. So there could be in certain cases financial obligations involved. In some cases, there could be other statutory obligations involved. So just be careful in terms of clearly identifying who the real inventors are. So just be mindful of that. I'm just wondering whether I need to pause at this stage for a moment just to see if there are any questions. Else I'll move forward. Okay. So I'll move forward, but please feel free to type in any questions or comments that you may have. You may not necessarily have questions, but any observations, your own examples or experiences that you may want to share, please feel free. Yeah. So I won't say it's a problem for startups. What I meant, look, so it's also important for organization to fairly recognize people who have contributed to the idea, right? So when I gave that pointer, my intent was to make sure that you have a very sophisticated process in place to rightly identify the inventors. Issue is not to say, okay, I'll only identify very, very few people because I want to safeguard my financial interest. No, that was not the reason I mentioned this point. The reason was just to make sure that the people who clearly qualify as inventors are listed. So I'll give you an example. Again, there's a company in agri-tech space. And there, I've seen a trend that the founder and the chairperson of that organization, she's listed as an inventor in every single patent that organization has filed. But we know that she's not gone to lab for last 15 years, for example. Now, whatever as a management, they've taken a call, but that's not a fair representation, strictly legally speaking, in terms of how inventorship should be recognized. So in that context, it's important. I won't say is in any way adversely impacting startups from Germany or ownership point of view. I just wanted to place it as something that you need to be mindful of. Because there could also be issues, for example, that people move on. If let's say very liberally, just to please people, you identified 15 inventors in a patent, and 10 out of 15 have moved on after 5 years from now, you have to chase them to get signatures on all kinds of forms and everything. If half of them are not even genuinely inventors, you just adding on to your administrative burden by trying to reach out to so many people. So that's the point I was trying to make. Then there are some follow-up questions here. Do investors worry about profit sharing with inventors in Germany? Similar problem happened in Japan some years ago when employee claimed rewards above what employment contract allowed. Right? So, when I've talked to my German friends, honestly, this has become way of life for them in the IP system. So they are because the system is in place for many years, and Germany, I would say, is a very mature ecosystem from patent and innovation perspective. Even the courts, for example, the judgments you get from Düsseldorf court in Germany are really well respected across the world because they really go deep into it. So I would say when I look at people operating in that market, they are comfortable with the idea that certain profits have to be shared with the inventors. And I don't see the mindset that they want to prevent anyone from being compensated if that person genuinely deserves it. It's just that it also means that they are more responsible in their conduct when they identify the inventors. So it's more around that maturity that has come in. Yes, you will have issues, you can have litigations where I know of some litigations in Germany where, for example, employees said that the sales numbers which were given by the employer to them and the reward thereby was not the correct representation. They underreported the sale and the profit. So those are other kind of challenges that you see. And yes, Dr. Premnath, you rightly mentioned that there could be issues in terms of what employment contract says, but the fact, for example, in Germany, it's sitting in your constitution. If your contract says something contrary to your constitution of the country, then obviously the constitution will prevail. So those clauses which are not in sync with the constitution obviously will be held void. But follow-up question is, such clauses create issues for pharma company in Germany. So the law is technology neutral, but if you're trying to say, for example, in pharma companies, if you have one or two patents that are really the blockbuster ones, right? If you're saying it from that perspective, yes. I won't say creates an issue, but I think creates in a way obligation for the companies and of course a big opportunity for the inventors. Because the constitution is not limiting it to any particular field of technology. Yeah. So I'll move forward with the next few pointers here. The amount of disclosure that you need to make in your patent application. So as you already probably know that on what basis patent office will grant you a patent. It will do it only when you're able to disclose fully what is the invention. So degree of detailing is important. Now, what is the degree of detailing? Detailing should be such that a person in that area of technology, let's say in the area of, let's say, formulation, somebody who works in the area of formulation, by reading your invention in a patent application that you have filed, should be able to clearly decipher and understand the invention. That degree of disclosure is required. Now, the question is, you have to be mindful of who your audience is when you start writing your patent application and talking about your technology. Overdoing it is a problem. Underdoing it is also a problem. So you have to strike that fine balance. If you don't give enough disclosure, patent office will not get the confidence that you are actually in possession of the invention. And if you don't get the confidence, they'll reject your application. They say you're not given enough disclosure, you're not given enough working examples to establish that you are indeed in possession of the invention. So your application can be rejected. On the other hand, if you try to play very, very safe and give everything that you have in your lab notes and things like that, then the problem comes in. You have ended up disclosing more than what was expected from you under the patent law. Now, anything extra that you have given is like donating to the public that, hey, here are my trade secrets, take it. You're actually then making it difficult for yourself because then you're able to disclose a lot more than what is required, which means that your competitors get to know a lot more than what you're required to disclose in the patent application and can create problem for you because some of that extra information is your trade secret. So, for example, if I know that in my lab's condition, parameters have to be a certain kind, but I also have inkling that when I scale up, the parameters might work at a slightly different level. Now that's in a way, trade secret for me. Do I want to disclose it in the patent application? Maybe not. Why should I make it easier for my competitors? That's where, some of, that fine balance needs to be struck. And that's where I think, people who are in the profession, who are advising on IP can help you, find that right balance. And trust me, it's a moving target. Because law and the patent practice has also evolved. So 10 years back, with limited information, you could get a patent. The same amount of information today, you might not be able to get a patent. So the expectation level from the patent office has also gone up in that context. So make sure that you have some sort of an advice available, because over disclosing is a problem and under disclosing is also a problem. Okay. Then comes the next pointer, which is about seeking multi-layer protection, because usually the single layer is inadequate. So what happens? We talked about example of a medical device. So you have a medical device, you are seeking a patent for it, you get a patent for it. The question is that there are other forms of IP which a medical device has, and you should consider getting protection, be it design, be it something around maybe some software thing which may qualify under copyright or whatever. Make sure that you're able branding in terms of trade secret, trade names and trademarks and all of that. So consider doing all of that. So today, of course, we are talking about patents, and in the future sessions, you will hear about other forms of IP as well, design protection and things like that. But be mindful that a single article, a single invention can have different facets where different forms of IP will play a role to help you get a strong, robust protection so that you're able to create more barriers for competitors from copying your invention. So be mindful of that. And even within one article, there could be multiple patents we can get. So let's say if you have a medical device, which is, let's say, a PCR device, handheld PCR device, so you can have a patent for the entire device. You may want to seek a separate patent for the cartridge that goes in. You might want to have a separate patent for the capillary system, or the fluid moves around, all of that. So make sure that you are able to get multi-layer protection, because even if one patent or one design application or design patent is knocked off by a competitor or by the patent office, at least you have other backup position with other IPs that can still help you enjoy the monopoly. So be mindful of that, explore that when you start building your IP portfolio and patent portfolio. Okay. I'm just wondering whether I need to pause here again, or what do you advise? Shall I continue?
Right now there are no questions.
There are no questions, so maybe I can continue. Now, other point I want to draw your attention to was about having a knowledge of the market, your current market as well as your future market. Now, again, if you are a young company, limited resources, so much to do. You may say, right now, my R&D team is sitting in India, so I'm not bothered about anything outside India. Let's start with Indian patent. The question, for example, theoretically can come in. If, let's say, tomorrow you start doing manufacturing for your device, let's say maybe China is not the great example in today's context, but let's say in Vietnam, you want to do manufacturing because of cost arbitrage or supply of some material from Southeast Asia. Then you will say, okay, my distribution channel, because I'm manufacturing in Vietnam, my distribution channel could be through Singapore. My market is US. Now, as a young company, how are you going to plan this? If you're going to limit your patent only to India, then you always have that anxiety that, okay, my manufacturing is in Vietnam. There's a threat of loss of IP theft in Vietnam, or some sort of infringement issues in Singapore, which is being used as a distribution hub. And most importantly, what if the infringement happens in US, which is the market for me today for my product? So therefore comes the difficult question, should I go for patent only in India? Should I go for patent only in two countries, let's say India and US? Or do I have the resources to stretch and file something in Vietnam or Singapore as well? It's a difficult question, But I think it's important to have a sense that certain things you can get a patent for at this stage. And then fortunately, patent law provides for some options by way of which you can actually delay the filing in other countries by a certain amount of time. So for example, under Paris Convention, once you file your first application, you have 1 year time. And within 1 year time, you can go ahead and file in any other country which is a member of Paris Convention. Today, I believe there are more than 175 countries or so, which are pretty much entire world in a way is a member of the Paris Convention. And then within 1 year from your first filing, you can add more countries that are filing more applications in those countries. So all that can be accomplished. Now, I'll also later on briefly touch upon PCT as a concept by way of which you can, through a single application, you can block the right, reserve the rights to file in more countries 2.5 years from your first filing. So what it does is that it reserves the option for you to add more countries within the next 2.5 years. So you're not spending money upfront, but you are able to, flag that today is my date of filing, and within the next 2.5 years, I can do it in any of the PCT member countries. And today, I think we have a large number of almost 150 or so countries, maybe more than that, which are members of the PCT, the Patent Cooperation Treaty. So all those options are available, but it's important for you to also have a clarity, because you can't really overindulge also, because patenting is an expensive exercise. So be mindful of, as a young company, bootstrapping, limited resources, how much you want to invest now and how much you can defer by what amount of time. So be mindful of that.
Do you want to take this?
Yeah.
At what stage should a startup do IPR due diligence?
Yeah. So it says further, it says like, should we do it while on the process of developing the product or when the product has been completely developed? Also, an idea on the cost or budget involved would be helpful. So, generally, due diligence, I have seen, I don't know whether you are in any sense confusing it with freedom to operate in any sense, but so let me address it from both the sides. So due diligence could be where kind of an IP audit in a way, so to say, happens. One kind of situation is where it is not necessarily product centric activity. It becomes more like tomorrow, for example, if somebody is investing in your company and they are doing a due diligence on your company, and IP also forms a part of their due diligence. That's when they look at your portfolio, IP portfolio, how big or small it is, how strong or weak it is, which all countries are covered, and things like that. So that's one stage where they look at whether you are involved in any litigation or not, have you received any notice or not, have you sent any notice or not, any of basic checks and balances in terms of inventorship, ownership, all that stuff happens, right? Other angle is what we call sometimes the freedom to operate. And if you're coming from that side, freedom to operate is when you are trying to figure out that, can I sell this product? What is the risk of me being sued by another player for infringement of their copy, their patent rights? If you're coming from that perspective, in terms of that product thing that you mentioned, at what stage we should do it, my view is that if you are a company which is developing lots of ideas, and you're running multiple projects on many of those ideas, then my advice is you do patentability certain analysis in the beginning for all those different ideas, because that's cheaper and faster process, gives you a sense of direction, how strong or weak your invention is. The freedom to operate comes in once from those set of projects. The moment you feel some projects are really shaping up well, where, in, let's say, a few months or in a year or so, a product can hit the market, there are good results in the lab, and there is interest from the investors and things like that, that's the time for you to do the freedom to operate on your technology or product or process, which tells you not only, because patentability search you already done, which means broadly your invention is novel, inventive, and all that. Freedom to operate is telling you what is the risk associated with you being sued by another company for infringement of their patent rights. To give an example, freedom to operate would mean in that sense that let's say you have developed, we're talking about handheld PCR device, for example. So you developed a PCR device as a whole, but you realize that the cartridge that goes into that PCR device, that design and that kind of functioning is already patented by somebody else in that country where you are seeking patent. Let's say we're talking about India here. So while you may believe you have a good patent on the entire device per se, but cartridge is a problem because that's one of the components in your device and that is somebody else's patent already in India. So while you have a positive patentability report, you will have a negative, you may have a negative freedom to operate report, which means that the moment you start offering to sell or start marketing and selling, there's a risk that you will be sued by the patent owner of that cartridge. So in that context, as I said earlier, to answer your question, do it at a stage when you believe that product is showing good results. You expect this product to hit the market in few months or year or so. That's the time to do it. The moment, another way to look at it is the moment you believe now you have to invest a lot in that on that product or technology. That's the time which is the best time for you to do an FTO, freedom to operate, so that you are mindful of the threats and accordingly have the confidence to go ahead with that kind of investment in or not. I know whether you answered that question or not. It's a long-winded story I gave you, if I understood your question right. The last part is also an idea on the cost and budget involved. So a lot depends upon the size of the portfolio. It's very difficult to say. I may not be able to quantify honestly. My own experience is that I'll put it in 3 buckets just to make it easier. Typically, if you had patentability search analysis in mind, then I think depending upon who the service provider is, it can range from 25K to 50-60K is a patentability search analysis. If you had freedom to operate in mind, it can cost from 1 to 2 lakh rupees per technology or per product, typically in India. For overseas jurisdiction, it could be a little more expensive. And then if you have due diligence in mind, then of course depends upon the size of the portfolio. If you have, let's say, a portfolio of 5-6 patents, let's say India-centric patents, and you want to do a due diligence and all of that, you may have to budget maybe, my rough guess, the wild guess, but maybe around 2-3 lakh rupees for that kind of a due diligence is what my mind says. It's very subjective and may vary from case to case. Right? We'll move forward now. Yeah, so this is what I just now covered in terms of freedom to operate. It's important, to do it. You don't have to do it for everything in the beginning. Only those projects that have started showing traction, you believe they can be monetized. That's the time you have to look at freedom to operate. And this is about the size of the portfolio that you may want to have. So while I'm a patent practitioner, but still I would end up saying that patent portfolio can sometimes be like a white elephant. You have to have the right size, but you also have to have the right quality around it. I know several companies that have got tons of patents granted, but they're not able to really make money out of it, either themselves or by way of licensing. And I also know some companies, very smart companies, young companies, even with 8-10 patents, they've been able to do very well in terms of either making the product or licensing of the technology. So just be mindful of how you're going to invest your resources on patent portfolio. It's important to have it. I would say in tech space, on science, technology, everything, it's important. It's important to create that threshold barrier for competitors, but just be mindful how much you should invest and stay focused on quality is what I would say. Quality and timelines are critical, and then follows the quantity side of things. I talked about, I did talk about that patent rights are all country-specific rights. One patent in one country is how it works. But then, countries across the world have also developed strategies which are very geographical strategies, where through a single application in certain regions, you can get many countries covered. So I have some examples here to give you a feel of how it works. You can have an example where in Europe, you can file a single patent application, which will cover all European states. And even though with Brexit, UK has moved on, but that is more applicable from trademark perspective. From patent perspective, even post-Brexit, UK is covered in a single application for entire Europe. So think of it, single patent application covering entire Europe with 40 plus countries. So that mechanism is available. Similarly, in Eurasian region, single application can cover 8 countries. Similarly, in Africa, by way of a repo, you can cover multiple countries, 20 countries in Africa through a repo, single application. WAPI is the other group in Africa, which covers other 17 non-overlapping countries. So think of it. If you have something, let's say in healthcare space, and you're looking at patent in Africa, through 2 patents, you can cover almost 40 countries in Africa. In Middle East, GCC, single application, 6 countries you can cover in Middle East. So there are several, regional patents you can get, as I showed you. And this PCT is what I had mentioned earlier. It has around 153, maybe a little more now, member states. What it does is you file a single application as a PCT application. It's not country-specific application, it's a generic application. PCT does not mature into any patent as an application per se. It's like, as I said earlier, you flag it by saying you are in possession of an invention. And this treaty gives you 2.5 years to add any of these 153 or 155 countries anytime during those 2.5 years time. So you can, based on how your company is going, how your inventions are progressing, how your team is developing, what kind of funding you're able to raise, you can then add more countries based on your commercial and strategic interest. So this is a tool available that you, as a young company, you can use particularly very effectively in a resource crunched kind of situation, so to say. Just want to give you a feel of kind of litigation. I won't take too much time on this, and I just hope you don't guys don't get into litigation in any sense whatsoever as young companies. But just want to give you a trend. In India, patent litigation is also increasing with time. And interestingly, I've looked at the data of 10 years from 2010 to 2020, and the top 10 litigators in the country are all pharmaceutical companies, pharmaceutical, biopharmaceutical organizations. So that's a trend we are seeing in terms of quantum. Of course, we see quite a bit happening in telecom space as well. But this is broadly what I had to share. And I think we have 2-3 minutes. We can take some more questions. Otherwise, we will close this.
So my colleague has pasted the feedback link in the chat box. Please fill it up before you move out from the session. We will keep the feedback link open till today night. If there are any questions, you can type in the chat box, or feel free to even raise your hand. We can unmute you if you want to put in your question yourself. Dr. Premnath, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, thank you. No, I was listening carefully. I just wanted to ask Ravi to also talk about implications of things like traditional knowledge and natural resources, if possible, briefly, and its implications on patentability.
Yeah. So, I'm glad you asked this question, Dr. Premnath. So, on the traditional knowledge thing, we have this typical examples of, turmeric and basmati and those kind of, landmark cases which were actually fought in US. The way it generally works is that, Look, patent is for something which is novel, something which is inventive. Now, our traditional knowledge, especially in terms of medicines and cures for different disease conditions, a lot of literature is available, but then a lot of information is orally transmitted from one generation to another. And the government realized and undertook this initiative, several years ago actually, to say all this needs to be documented for two reasons. One, so the information which is, let's say, available currently in smaller pockets is more widely available for people to refer in terms of traditional knowledge. Second, which is more relevant to the patent, is that sometimes a patent can be wrongly granted for certain kind of inventions, where the inventions are essentially about let's say, some sort of a cure for a disease condition, which is a traditional knowledge known for many years now. So, like what happened in the turmeric case, for example, 20 years, 25 years ago, somebody in the US got a patent for turmeric, for wound healing property of turmeric. And it was a person actually of Indian origin, but based in US, who filed the patent and got the patent. And this is an interesting case, and I'll take a minute to explain that. The patent was for, as I said, wound healing property of turmeric. And in fact, it's just coincidental. We're sitting here, at Venture Center, and CSIR was given the responsibility to fight that case and see how that patent can be knocked off in US. And in US at that point in time, the re-examination proceedings used to be ex parte proceedings, which means if we are representing CSIR, and actually, it's interesting that our firm actually represented CSIR in this case, Government of India, we represented in US on this case. We had to collate all the literature, whatever that is publicly available, and send it to US PTO, and the US examiner will look at it. We will not have an opportunity to argue the case. We can only submit documents and our written submission. So what we did, we submitted a whole lot of information. Based on that information, the patent holder who had a patent for that turmeric, wound healing property of turmeric, he narrowed down the scope of the patent to say, no, I'm limiting my claim in that patent after grant, limiting my claim to say it is wound healing property only for surgically inflicted wounds. So he narrowed it, not any kind of wound, only wounds which are surgically inflicted, then turmeric can cure, heal those wounds. And fortunately, one of the document which we were able to get from Hamdard University in Delhi, and that document was of, I think, some 1856, 55, something like that. It was in Persian language. So we actually got the certified English translation and submitted it to the USPTO. And in that document, it was just an abstract. It showed that after the delivery of the baby, the umbilical cord used to be cut. So there is a surgically inflicted wound because there is a scissor involved or whatever, a blade involved to cut it. And then turmeric used to be applied during that time to allow that wound to heal. So that became the closest prior art and the traditional knowledge literature, which helped us knock off that wrongly granted patent. So it's interesting that this point came up, and so therefore traditional knowledge is knowledge known to everyone, available in our tradition, is now consolidated, and several patent offices in the world now have a digital copy of that entire library that Indian government has put together through CSIR, so that all patent offices now actually, when they do the prior art search for any invention in their country, they also use this library and database to ensure that the traditional knowledge is not allowed to be patented. So that's a long-winded answer to the point you raised, Dr. Prema. I think there was a second point also you talked about. There's a follow-up question here.
Yeah, Deepak, you can unmute and ask your question. And then we have one more. Deepak, you want to ask your question? You can unmute yourself.
I think we might need to help him with that. Yeah. Now.
Yeah. Hi.
Now. Yeah.
I'm audible.
Yes.
I'm audible. Okay. Actually, what we wanted to check was, so the solution that we are working on, definitely there are two parts to it. One is there is a complex program, behind what we were creating, and there is this hardware piece as well. What we are really interested in checking out, the algorithm or the program, is something we are really working hard on that particular aspect. Now, what we have been told is, unfortunately, in India, the algorithm programs are not patented, particularly they are rejected. Now, given this situation, and even before we, consider the next stage of whatever PCT or international filing, so in such kind of a situation, how do we really safeguard our solution, specifically on the algo part?
Yeah. So Deepak, I know that, generally, sometimes we hear people talking about that you can't get patents for, computer program and things like that. So I'll give you some, the way it generally works in India. And Indian position is very similar to European position. And then, US position has also shifted and has converged with European and thereby in a way with Indian position. And that is that, if you are able to show that your computer program or algorithm is solving a real world problem.
Okay.
So for example, if I can, let's say, if I'm able to transmit data faster, I'm able to solve a real world problem. If I'm able to encrypt the data in a different way or in a better way, I'm solving a real world problem. So what happens is, in your case, if you can translate that, what your computer program or algorithm is doing, into the application side of things and focus on that in your patent application,
Okay,
then
okay,
you'll be
okay.
able to get a patent. So what they say in Europe they call it as a technical, which technical problem are you solving? So if you can say, here is a technical problem and here is my technical solution to it, then you are able to easily get a patent, be it India, Europe, or US. In US, they word it differently, they articulate it differently, but essentially it boils down to how you're able to technically solve a problem. And if you keep your whole software solution as ambiguous, earlier till 2010, 11, 12, a lot of software patents were filed which were very, very ambiguous. And then US Supreme Court had a series of judgments which said what you call a 101 rejection in US. So now they say that your claims and your invention has to be very definite, clear about what technical problem you're solving. So Deepa, if you can focus on that part in a patent, there's no reason why you will not be able to get a patent on this. And as I understand, you also have some hardware element around it, which only strengthens your case. Yeah.
Sure, sure. Thank you so much, Ravi. Actually, the thing is, what we have been told is, because on the algorithm front, it is very difficult to get the approvals in India, but definitely in the Western countries, especially in US, it still stands a chance. But now to answer your point, yes, it definitely solves a real world problem that what we are looking at. But the issue, I wouldn't say an issue, but the challenge here is because if you have to go with the process, now, I mean, we have been told that you have to first file it in India and then go for the international filing, is what we
I
understand
think,
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Deepak, you probably need a more detailed discussion. We're happy to do that separately. Okay.
Sure, sure, sure.
But
Sure,
basically, I think what Ravi is suggesting is that you can probably look at a system that solves a particular problem. Okay. And enabled by that algorithm. But the algorithm per se is not being, separately protected. Okay.
Okay.
There's a question from Gaurav about monoclonal antibodies. Do you want to comment on that, how it's treated in patenting in both India and the US and Europe?
Yeah. So broadly speaking, in molecular antibodies, the focus has to be on the sequence. And if you're able to focus on that, the critical part of the monoclonal antibody sequence, then there's no reason why you're not able to get the patent on the sequence as well as the entire antibody again, which is the sequence. Naturally occurring once, you always have a problem. Monoclonal should not be a problem in that sense. You have to focus on the human intervention in that context. Method of treating any disease condition with that monoclonal antibody will be a problem in India, but will not be a problem in US for sure. In Europe, you can reword it into a method of, or not a method, but use claims, what they call, earlier used to call as Swiss type claims. You can get it. So in broad sense, in US, the shift is, if it's naturally occurring, you have a problem. As long as you can showcase some human intervention, let's say the sequence here, monoclonal antibody, with a human intervention involved, you'll be able to get a patent for that in US and Europe. I don't see any problem in that sense.
There's a add-on to that. Can hybridoma derived MABs without affinity maturation or patented, can they be patented?
I don't think it should be a problem. I think the logic remains the same as what I mentioned earlier. But as long as I said, if you can showcase human intervention, modification, you're not limiting it in terms of any sense in terms of merely isolation, and that holds good for a lot of things in life science space. Even from diagnostic perspective, earlier the view was that if I stop one step before defining what disease condition that subject has, will it be patentable because I'm not diagnosing per se. But the question comes in that, when you are measuring at the biochemical level, how one marker level is increasing, decreasing and all, then there's enough stock of knowledge available to say, hey, ultimately it means you'll be able to figure out whether this person has that disease condition or not. So same thing here, as long as you can showcase human intervention, you have a good case. The moment it boils down to only, isolation, that's the kind of a reference point. If you can keep, then you can use that for a lot of situations. Yeah.
Now, Ravi, I think running out of time, but we'll take one last question and close. So Bhaskar Bhushan has a question. I've asked him to unmute. You can take it and then we'll close after that. Yeah.
Sure.
Hello, sir.
Hi.
Hello, sir. My question is that in one patent, how many ideas we can protect more than one? We can, if it is possible to protect more than one ideas. As I have an app, I've made an application of a political media aggregator. So I have many concepts in that. How can I get it patented?
So as regards the first part of your question, there's a concept what they call as unity of invention in patents. So it means that in a single patent application, only you can have multiple claims, but all those should be aligned in terms of unity of invention. So for example, if I develop, and the first one to develop the mouse, then the mouse per se, I can claim in that patent application. The method by which I assemble that device, I can have that claim also in the same patent application. I can also have a method of using this mouse to click and access data and all of that. All these three can go into single patent application because it's a unity of invention, that it is about mouse and how to make it, what it looks like, or how it functions, right? So as long as that is aligned, all that can go into single application. Now, as regards the second part of your question, in terms of drafts and other kind of material, I think that information may not be enough for me to actually comment on it. Maybe if we can connect, maybe offline, or somebody in the team here can advise you specific to what you have in your lab.
Okay, sir.
All right. Yeah. So thank you so much, Ravi, for this wonderful session. I think we have addressed all the questions. His email address is given there, and you can reach out to us also if you wish to get in touch with him or have any more queries for Ravi. So thanking you once again, Ravi, for this session. And we will meet all of you on 27th of September at 4 o'clock for our next talk, which is around copyrights. So the theme is only copyrights. And please do log in again, and we will remind you once again with the joining details. Thank you once again. Please do remember to give us feedback. You can please.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Ravi.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr. Mukta. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.